be held accountable under the OIA.
No.
I move to question number 2, John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What reports has he received on wage increases in New Zealand?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, everybody's own circumstances are of course different, but average movements in wages across the economy are shown in the Quarterly Employment Survey, the latest release of which came out last week. They showed that average hourly wages rose 2.6% in the last year, compared to inflation of around 0.9%. Average weekly wages rose by even more, 2.9%, and the average wage is now over $53,000 a year before tax. So it is quite clear that on average, wages in New Zealand are rising considerably faster currently than the cost of living.
Supplementary question, John Hayes.
Mr Speaker, how does the minimum wage in New Zealand compare to the average wage?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the minimum wage is currently $13.50 an hour in New Zealand, which is half the average hourly wage of $27. The OECD's database shows that this proportion is in fact the highest in the developed world, and that on this measure our minimum wage is therefore the most generous in the developed world as a proportion of the average hourly wage. In all other countries, the minimum wage is under half the average wage. For example, Canada, where it is 40% of the average wage, the UK, where it is 38%, and the US, where it is 28%.
Supplementary question, John Hayes.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Minister. Do any industries stand out as having higher than average wage increases?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, yes, a few industries do stand out. One of them is the manufacturing industry, where average weekly wages rose 4.1% over the last year. And that's actually not a short-term thing. Over a longer period, wages in manufacturing have also grown faster than average. Over the last 4 years, average weekly wages in the manufacturing sector have risen 18% compared to 13% in the economy as a whole. No doubt that fact has been brought up and discussed at the Opposition's manufacturing inquiry.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Has the wage gap between New Zealand and Australia grown larger over the last year? And if so, will he be providing milestones for National's promise to close the wage gap with Australia, given that it's growing rather than closing?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I don't have that information to hand, but I do know that the member is very careful to talk about the wage gap rather than the after-tax wage gap, which people actually experience. But again, the member, if he wants to talk about the differences between here and Australia, fundamentally the main difference is the investments made in Australia in the resources sector over the last few years. That's the fundamental difference. And if the member would like to reverse his party's ambivalence to the investment in resources sectors in the New Zealand economy, I'm sure we could have a good discussion.
Supplementary question, John Hayes.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Minister, by how much have wages risen since September 2008?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the best measure over a longer period of time is, of course, growth in after-tax wages, because that takes into account factors like changes in income tax and GST. Since September 2008, the average wage after tax has increased a total of 20... Just wait, you'll find out. Since September 2008, the average wage after tax has increased a total of 22%, from a bit over $36,000 a year to a little bit over $44,000 a year. Inflation over the same period has totalled 8.5%. So it's a total of 22% in after-tax wages versus 8.5% of inflation over the same period. Again, everybody's circumstances are different, but it is clear that on average, working New Zealanders have had a sizable increase in their standard of living over the last 4 years.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
In light of his answer to my last supplementary, has the after-tax wage gap between New Zealand and Australia grown larger over the last year?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I do not have those figures to hand. I said that previously, but I am very suspicious because the member is only talking about the last year, and we know what he likes to do is go through series and series of data and find the little bit that he can do to get his story. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that in this country, our cost of living has gone up 8.5% over the last 4 years, and people's incomes after tax have gone up 22%.
Question number 3 in the name of Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he agree with